I'm just reenacting that one episode with Ransom. This is very normal. Don't judge me. Just gotta do my little Picard maneuver to get ready. And hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well. And as you can probably tell, I'm just a teensy little bit excited because we are here to talk once again about one of my favorite shows of all time, Star Trek Lower Decks. This time to discuss its 5th season premiere, as well as its premiere of its final season, which is a sad thing that we'll talk about in a little bit. This episode, however, titled Dos Cerritos, which, if you speak Spanish, means 2 Cerritos. I took Spanish in high school, so I know that. So this is why you come to my reviews. I give you this kind of information. What would you do without me? Yes. So let us get into this episode. As per usual, I'm going to stay mostly general for the first minute or two, just give my overall thoughts on the episode, and then I will go into a scene-by-scene deep dive after that if you want to jump ship at that point so you don't get spoiled for the episode. But staying general first up, I have to say I loved this season premiere. This one was an absolute joy for me, not just because it's Lower Decks, but because it is building off of a storyline that I was really excited to see kick off at the end of last season, which is the fact that Tendi has been sort of sent away to Orion to become the mistress of the winter constellations yet again against her will, and yet her having a lot more confidence in doing so. That sort of like, you got this, Tendi thing at the end of last season.
You've got this.
And this picks up right there with her character, and as you all know, Tendi is my favorite character in Lower Decks, and one of my favorite characters in Star Trek. I mean, the angle is not right. Maybe I'll bring her over later, but I have a literal standee of Tendi. A Tendi standee? Tandy. I have a Tandy over there in the corner. And I love her so much. She is everything that I aspire to be, that I love about Star Trek. And I've always read her as a trans metaphor, and literally trans if you want to. So I resonate with her on a bunch of different levels. And the storyline that we get here not only does not disappoint me, it features Tendi at her absolute best and what I love her for. But also, just to say it continues for more than one episode. We get a continuation at the end of this, which is one of my biggest problems with Lower Decks, especially when it starts new seasons, in that it tends to revert back to the status quo pretty quickly in most cases. Like almost every season has some minor status quo change, like, Boimler going off to the Titan or something like that. And then it fairly quickly, after only an episode or so, resets its back to the status quo. There have been some exceptions, such as the promotion of most of our characters last season. But for the most part, it kind of sticks to that status quo. And here we're not getting that, at least not right away. And I love that. I think that is a really good thing to give us some more focus on Tendi and her life and her background, especially because Lower Decks, I think one of the most unique things that it has added to the overall Star Trek universe is it's diving into the Orions and their culture. I think that's one of the things that they just really interestingly built out in their corner of the Star Trek universe. And considering the Orions are literally a species that date back to the very first ever filmed episode of Star Trek, The Cage, that's saying something. And I think they've done an absolutely wonderful job. And this episode is no different. And actually, without spoiling too much, because it's part of the fun, connects 2 different parts of Orion lore that existed in Star Trek but never kind of touched, and I love the way they connect them, and it's a lot of fun. The other element of this episode is a fun one too, where we're back on the Cerritos, sort of dealing with a more typical Cerritos situation, Star Trekian situation, kind of aping on parallel universe stories that are fairly common in Star Trek universe storytelling, but again, using it to tell a really fun, character-focused episode. I think that side of this episode is fun. I enjoy it quite a lot, but it's nothing super special as compared to the Tendi storyline. But I enjoy it. I mean, I think it's a strong premiere episode. So yeah, I think if you're looking for a premiere episode like last year's Tuvix episode, which kind of was a celebration of Star Trek Voyager, this episode doesn't really have that, but I think it does some unique, really fun stuff and kicks off this season in a really fun way. That being said, before I get into the scene-by-scene breakdown and all the things that I loved about it, just to talk overall about my feelings on this being the final season, I am really upset by that fact. I mean, y'all know that I am a huge Lower Decks fan and a huge Trekkie, and you know, I'm seeing in this current streaming era for a lot of different shows, them being canceled, I think, before their time. I really do. I mean, just listening to the interviews with Mike McMahon and Alex Kurtzman and other folks who have worked on the show, it's very clear that they didn't want to end the show at this point and that there's more story in their mind to tell. And I'm very upset by the fact that they don't get to tell it. And it just speaks to this streaming era of television where TV shows just don't get to exist that long. And I mean, on that front, there is a bittersweetness to it because Lower Decks has had 5 seasons, which is frankly a hell of a lot more than many TV shows get nowadays. But even beyond that, it's like 5 seasons really amounts to 50 episodes, which is like less than or almost 2 seasons of what Next Generation or Deep Space Nine would have been. A little bit more, but not too much. So I don't know. It's one of those really frustrating, sad things that, you know, there's a bittersweetness to it because I do think, you know, Lower Deck seems to be going out on a high note, but it is going up before its time. It deserves to have at least 2 more seasons like all the other Next Generation style shows before it and have at least one of those seasons be mildly disappointing, just like most of the Next Generation era shows before it. But yeah, I hopefully there's more to come. I mean, they've already announced a Star Trek Lower Decks comic. You know, there's so many other Star Trek shows, and there's plenty of places and opportunities for these characters to appear in both animation and live action going forward. There's hints that Alex Kurtzman and Mike McMahon still want to do something that they were talking about at Comic-Con, so maybe. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to be very loud about this season. So if you are a Lower Decks fan out there, be loud about how much you're excited about the season. I'm going to be, and hopefully that means we'll get more, whether it be, you know, my hope would be that they're going to do animated movies of Lower Decks after this. Like, get the band back together and do like 1 movie a year or something like that, and just have it be a big blowout animated movie and just have a lot of fun with it. I think that would be probably the best direction, in my opinion, to go, but I'm not the one behind the scenes, so who the hell knows? But at the end of the day, all that matters is us fans being loud about how much we love Lower Decks, because I think that this show is really special in so many ways, both as a Star Trek show, as a show that is about positivity and found family and you know, a queer vibe to Star Trek that I don't think we get enough of in science fiction nowadays, and I think that that's a detriment to science fiction. I think Lower Decks has really added to that. Anyways, that's enough about my rant. It's going to make this video already super, super long, but screw it. This is just me. This is my chance to gush about a show that I love, so screw it. I don't care about the algorithm. I care about sharing love. So let us deep dive into the episode itself. I am going to talk full spoilers here, so if you have not seen the episode yet, get the fuck out of here. What the fuck, man? Sorry. It wasn't even funny. That was just me saying because it's funny. Probably gonna have to censor that because YouTube is so puritanical nowadays. Anyways, speaking of puritanical, we start off the episode with a scene that was actually released a few weeks ago where we have Tendi undercover on a kind of collector-y ship, kind of similar to Kivas Fajo from the episode The Most Toys of the Next Generation. Love the design of this guy, the like weird metal thing going through his head. And Tendi is obviously pretending to be a different species. And I like this guy very clearly into the sex stuff. He's got a Horgan, he's got a fertility idol that Tendi remarks upon, and I was just thinking, like, this guy is what Gene Roddenberry really wanted Star Trek to be, you know? Just sex idols all over the place, like, really living up to Gene Roddenberry's vision here. But we have the Orion ship coming in, and I love the slime dungeon line that we get there about, like, oh, I would never go back to my slime dungeon. I love when always Lower Decks just sort of, like, just puts a slight swerve on the sort of stereotypical insult or joke that you would expect. But then Tendi reveals herself, the Orions attack the ship, and I love that they throw a knife through his hand just like Mariner got all of last season in the One Orion episode. And I will say, the collector guy does his best Boimler scream, making Jack Quaid proud with whoever played that character, which was very, very fun. But then we get our start for Tendi's arc in this episode, which is the Orion pirates that her crew want to start killing people, but Tendi tries to stop them. And she manages to just talk them down into is ripping the weird golden thing out of this guy's head that he says is prescription. Absolutely Lovely. We then jump into our opening credit sequence, which not much to say here. The only thing that is different this time around is we get even more ships added into that big battle during the credits. This is just now absolutely ridiculous, and I love it. We now have the green hand, the green space hand from the original series. We have V'ger popping in there at one point, and I believe there's some Tholian web ships floating around. Yeah, this has just gotten to be an absolute mess, and I love it. No way I would even get anywhere involved in any of that going on. So I almost wish we just get another season just to see how they would like add on to this nonsense that this has become. Because once V'ger showed up, I'm like, well, everyone's screwed. I don't know. I don't understand. But then we jump over to the Cerritos, and I am going to talk about each storyline separately because they're very distinct storylines, Tendies and the Cerritos. But we have T'Lyn and Mariner playing Kalto, which is the game that Tuvok played, and Boimler coming in and saying he's in Fleet Magazine. And I will say, that magazine looked pretty cool. I would read it. There was some fun stuff on there, like Blood is the New Black for Klingons, and like Q-Who, the Continuum Awards or whatever it was on there. I thought those were fun little Easter eggs. But Boimler's obviously upset that he didn't make the 30 under 30 list, and that Naomi Wildman herself made the list in the honorable mentions. So fun little Naomi Wildman call out there. And he says that she's basically 10 years old. I actually looked it up. At this point in the timeline, she is only 8. Which actually surprised me. For some reason, I thought Lower Decks was set a little bit later on in the timeline. Actually, she might be 9 or 10, depending on when this episode is set timeline-wise. It's kind of a little nebulous how long Lower Decks has technically been going on for in universe, like a year or two or something like that. So she's somewhere between 8 and 10 or so, which again, just weird to think like, yeah, this is actually fairly close after the end of Star Trek Voyager and Nemesis, as opposed to something like Prodigy or hell, Picard, which is way further out into the future. But also we get the kickoff for other characters' arcs in this scene. Mariner's sort of worried about what leader she's going to be to the new ensigns that she's been assigned. And Rutherford is hiding away in a dark corner trying to keep himself busy to keep the bad thoughts away from the fact that Tendi is no longer there. And I just have to say, relatable. I have definitely been there where I'm just like, well, don't want to think about the sad things in my life, so I'm just going to work really, really hard. That's definitely not a vibe that I've been feeling about this country at the moment. Anyways, that's too much at the moment. Let's talk about Star Trek. But then our crew members get called up to the bridge to deal with a quantum fissure, and T'Lyn notes that these fissures have been appearing with abnormal irregularity. Abnormal irregularity would be weirder. Anyways, abnormal regularity, which has me wondering, considering we don't really get an answer for why that's the case this episode, makes me think maybe that is our season-long arc this season. Who knows? Well, there's usually Lower Decks has a little hints of some overall season arc storyline in its premiere episode, so maybe this is it. We'll find out. That's just a random guess, though. But they do get sucked into the fissure and brought into a second universe where we meet another Cerritos, a Dos Cerritos, if you will. Yeah, see, that's why they call it that. Again, this is why you have me. Two other things about the scene, though. I love Boimler sort of trying to be imaginative about other universes. Like, oh, what if they have, like, feet for hands or something more imaginative than that? And I'm just sitting here being like, oh, Boimler, you're being your best Marvel executive, just unable to think of really interesting ideas for the multiverse. Is that too much shade? Nah, that's accurate. And also when they go through the light fissure, obviously we get a light show similar to the warp scene in Star Trek The Motion Picture. I also love Ransom saying we're like getting dunked into the fissure like a cookie in milk or whatever. It was just like accurate. But then we get to meet some of the alternate duplicates of our crew members. We get Becky Mariner, who is Mariner and the captain of the ship, and as we will learn, is a bit of a hard ass to everybody. We also get Shax, is kind of looking like Geralt of Rivia a little bit here. But my favorite one out of all of them is T'Lyn. Her slight difference is this other universe T'Lyn says remarkable instead of fascinating, which I found to be rather funny and does get a really cute payoff at the end of the episode. And from here we get our classic Star Trek briefing room scene and just some fun little jokes here. They obviously do the technobabble thing of like they need to work together to combine the ships to be able to get back through the fissure. But I also like them arguing over Prime Universe or fake Cerritos of like which one's Prime, like who's better than who. Like Mariner saying which one's clearly freakish. I just fun little bits there. But then Mariner going off with Becky to say, oh, I would love to see your leadership style. And we do get little hints here in this scene of everyone in the background sort of standing at attention whenever Mariner walks by, or Becky, I should say, walks by. So enjoyed that little hint of things to come. Meanwhile, Boimler goes off with other Boimler, which has this really nice beard. Boimler looks kind of nice with a purple beard. I kind of think that's really fun. Though we know Boimler does dye his hair purple, so I guess he's dyeing his beard purple, which is interesting. Unique choice there, Boimler. Unique choice. But we also find out that other Boimler is kind of the coolest, chillest dude ever. And like every scene he's in, he's like, that's adorable when talking about Rutherford naming other Rutherford. And like him being supportive of our Boimler, just being like, I'm sure you got this, like find your own way. And like, man, dude is just chill. And I like the nuance of Boimler's storyline here where they're sort of out there talking about this, which is Boimler is very like excited that the other version of him is like, yeah, it's very chill, but it's not even necessarily jealousy. I feel like Boimler of seasons 1 and 2 would be much more jealous of this Boimler, but it's more, it's less jealousy and more a slight insecurity on his part of like wanting to validate himself and figuring out, kind of like Mariner, how best to lead and looking for a distinct pathway or rules to follow or like a guidelines to follow and not necessarily trusting his own choices, his own identity, his own vibes. And again, that's a sort of subtler storyline going on here because he does steal the Fleet magazine from the other Boimler. He sort of downloads it. And again, I'm assuming that might come up a little bit where he's sort of like thinking about like his arc this season about like what is his command style, and I like that. I think it's a slight nuance in his characterization versus how he's been and like where he's been going on as an arc as a leader heading towards captaincy. So love that little nuance here. The storyline that I liked less, and probably my least favorite storyline of the episode, was the fact that Rutherford was sort of playing with Rutherford and like really into, I like the joke that he was really into the fact that like Rutherford had all these cool upgrades, but was disappointed that Rutherford had deleted his memories of Tendi. Now, the reason that I dislike this storyline is not because it's bad necessarily, and dislike is a strong word. I think it's fine, but I think it needed a little bit more room to breathe than what we get for it, and a little bit more exploration of it to have it really land for me. And then the other element of it is the way it's resolved is Rutherford sort of reprograms Rutherford kind of against his will. The Rutherford says like, I'm not here to make friends, and then our Rutherford reprograms him and does make him want to have friends. And yeah, Rutherford at the end of the episode does sort of say like, oh, I want to sort of like focus on, you know, having relationships again and being friends with people, and he doesn't delete his memories, which is sweet and nice. But I don't know, just the sort of quick glossing over of like, I'm just gonna reprogram without you saying it's okay. I don't know, just a piece of the joke that I'm like, I'm not like bothered or offended by it too much, but it's just one of those like, I don't know if I like that, and it kind of goes by really quick and doesn't give enough depth to the storyline. I think it would have been more affecting if Rutherford, I should say, had actually like broken his programming or reminded him of Tendi, something a bit more emotional based and character based rather than just a simple reprogramming, breaking consent. So that's my one knock for the episode. It's the only storyline I didn't like. Don't hate it, but it was certainly not one of my favorites. But we also get to follow Becky and Mariner as Mariner starts to learn that Becky is a hard ass and everyone is sort of ruled by fear on her ship. I like at one point when she's sort of yelling out to the crew in the shuttle bay when there's an argument between the Kzinti. She says, there's no interpersonal conflict on my ship, which is obviously a call out to Gene Roddenberry's rule at the beginning of Star Trek The Next Generation, which was that there is no interpersonal conflict between Starfleet officers. So just a nice little shout out to that Roddenberry's box, as you were, and when I say Roddenberry's box, I'm not thinking about what you think. I'm thinking about Roddenberry's box was the name Michael Piller gave to essentially that rule. If we're thinking about Roddenberry's box, it's a very different discussion, though one I'm sure Roddenberry would be open to. I'm sorry that I'm like this. Now, obviously, they attempt to try to do the warp drive thing, but it fails. I love that Freeman is kind of trying to figure out the entire episode why her duplicate is not there, and eventually learns that she was on Starbase 80. So that's kind of fun. Like, oh, what the hell happened there? And knowing that, I believe Mike McMahon has mentioned that we're going to see Starbase 80 later this season. Maybe that'll be some foreshadowing coming up, which I think is kind of fun. Leads to a fight on the bridge, and Mariner sort of walks away, but then she comes back, and she sort of talks trash to the wrong T'Lyn, which was very funny. But then as they figure things out, Becky calls her into her ready room and switches places with her because Becky is tired of having a stick up her ass, essentially, and gives a sarcastic Vulcan salute to our Mariner, and she's like, oh, that's what that's like. Which, again, it's kind of funny because it, again, shows a little bit of growth on our Mariner's part, where she's now in the position of her mother. Like, she has grown to have more confidence and authority and leadership style, and sort of knows what her mother is feeling and what her mother kind of dealt with her sometimes with Becky's character, sort of coming from the opposite end, but still. So I thought that was a nice little subversion of her character. And then we get a fun action sequence where Mariner tries to order the crew to take down the other Cerritos as Becky tries to escape. But she actually does have to reveal herself, and that is what gets everyone to trust her, because she can't be like Becky. That's just not who she is. And I think that that's a fun way to resolve the storyline of Mariner sort of trusting her own individuality and her own leadership style. And I also like that Freeman figured it out as well, because Becky would call her mother, and Mariner would never do that, which I thought was kind of a fun little subversion. I love that Freeman's like, oh yeah, I already know it's not you. And she's talking about like, oh, I can prove it to you that I'm your daughter. You told me about a mole that you had, and it's like, no, that's fine. Don't worry about that. I thought was also great. Also, I loved earlier in the episode, Ransom sort of calling each other handsome, even though they were arguing. Loved that little bit. But we do get one quick little coda on this, where the crew is sort of talking about their character arcs ending around the dinner table, and T'Lyn used the word remarkable, and it was her playing a joke on the rest of them. And I love how everyone is just sort of laughing, and T'Lyn just sort of like sits there sweetly, and I don't know, it's so Vulcan, and yet just also so T'Lyn, where she's playing a joke, but she's not laughing, but she's very satisfied that she sort of got a laugh out of everybody. I don't know, that was one of the most endearing beats I have seen from T'Lyn, which is saying a lot because I am very endeared to T'Lyn, love her to death. So that was just an absolute sweet beat. But speaking of people that I love to death, let's jump over to Tendi's storyline. So we jump back after the raid at the opening of the episode, where she is sort of running her ship, and her crew is very murderous, very, very murderous indeed. And so Tendi calls her sister to Erica to ask, can I go back to Starfleet? Have I paid off my debt? Oh, speaking of debt, I forgot in the opening sequence, the Kivas Fajo kind of guy mentions that he had to underpay his workers to be able to pay for one of his fertility idols, which, you know, is Lower Decks being very anti-capitalist based. Love that. But anyways, Derica says, you have not been able to pay off your debt yet, but I have a way for you to do that. You can get this ship for me, this warship for me, that dates back to the Orion Plague era, which I loved this because, again, I don't think we've ever heard of the Orion Plague era, so it's just a little bit of like tidbits of Orion history that sort of get laid here, that they had an era where there was a big plague that affected a lot of the Orions. So just interesting little lore tidbits there. And so they arrive at the warship on the planet, and they're exploring it, but then they are ambushed by a group of blue Orions, which is a hilarious callback. We've gotten little references to these guys on Lower Decks before, but this is the first time that they've been put front and center. For those of you who don't know the joke here, way back in Star Trek the Animated Series, the cartoon show of Star Trek back in the 70s, there was an episode of that show called The Pirates of Orion, or Orion, depending on how you want to say it, which was directly pulling from the Orions from the original series. However, in that episode, either intentionally or just based on the colors that they used to sort of draw the episode, those Orions looked blue rather than green, as well as having those ridiculous uniforms. And also, everyone in the episode called them Orions.
Orions are not thieves.
There's different stories on this. It's not for sure. I'd have to talk to my friend who is an expert on Star Trek the Animated Series. But the running story, I believe, is that just some people they didn't have a pronunciation guide, and so they just called them Orions, and then they just went with that for the rest of the episode, instead of calling them Orions. So the fact that in this episode here of Lower Decks, they call each other, or the Blue Orions call the Orions Orions, and the Orions call them Orions. That it sort of creates this thing of like, oh, the Blue Orions, just they say Orion instead of Orion, and it sort of fixes that. And we get like little tidbits, like they start fighting, and you know, the women crew, they start saying like, oh, you patriarchal jerks in your weird uniforms, which like goes to show why they're all men, when, you know, we've seen from Lower Decks that Orions are a very matriarchal society. So just like little bits like that, just it's like one of those, like, it's funny little jokes for those who know, but it's also just connecting little Star Trek lore pieces, which I think is kind of fun. Just sort of making that stuff work in canon is always a fun little exercise that this episode plays with. But obviously one of Tendy's crew kills, or tries to kill, the leader of the Blue Orions, but Tendy sort of sends him away and saves him secretly, though he is kind of surprised by this fact. Later on, though, when they sort of get trapped by the Orions, it is revealed to her crew that Tendy saved the guy's life, and so her crew starts to mutiny against her. But then sort of Tendy sort of stands up for herself, and we get the reveal here that Tendy's crew is only wanting to kill because they're trying to follow in Tendy's footsteps, which is to be the best pirate ever, so that they can escape. And Tendy sort of sets them straight and says, like, that's not how I escaped. I just happened to be a very good pirate, but I escaped because I chose to be who I wanted to be, and I chose to leave, which I love this. I mean, as many of you know, I as I've said before, I adore Tendy, and I read Tendy through a transgender lens, like just a critical reading of her as trans. Now, what that means is I do view her as literally trans. There's little hints about like the pheromone stuff that I've talked about elsewhere, where you could read Tendy as literally being trans, within the transgender within the canon of Lower Decks. However, more thematically, this is something that actually happens within the trans community, where people who are trans but haven't maybe even come out about it yet will often try to reinforce their gender roles to try and say like, no, I am actually like for trans women will often be like, I'm actually really a man. And it's why you actually see there's actually a disproportionate amount of trans women in the military, because military is this very like masculine coded thing in America. And so a lot of trans women who are not out yet, or even sometimes when they're out, will join the military to sort of like prove their manhood. Well, obviously, they're trans women, and they'll figure that out in their own time. But it is a thing where, trans people will often try to double down before they come out or something like that on their assigned gender role, and try to prove it to themselves that this is what they really are, when really they have to other shit to figure out. And so I kind of liked this reveal that, this sort of pseudo feminine masculinity that the Orions have, the sort of matriarchal, what we would code as masculinity of being aggressive and murdery, is something that they're doubling down on to try to escape the roles that they are put on them as Orions. But Tendy's like, no, you can choose to be who you are. Again, just a very trans theme in this episode. It's not a map one for one, but that's when Star Trek works best, when it works in these sort of thematic metaphors that reveal stuff about our human condition. So I don't know. I love stuff like that. It really fits Tendy's character and continues with the things that I love about her, and just my personal reading of her thematically and literally. So yeah, I enjoyed that a lot, and I love that they like wanted to dance, and one of them was like, I wanted to teach ethics, but only in night classes, which is just oddly specific and funny considering that she's doing all the murdering and wants to teach ethics. But they ultimately side with her, and they find out that this is actually a medical ship, again going back to the Orion Plague stuff, and they are able to use that to put laughing gas on the Blue Orions and defeat them. And I also love the fact that they're laughing about the uniforms, like, no, I actually like how I look, and the fact that their breathers actually don't keep out the gas. So that was a lot of fun. But this has us wrap out the end of the episode, where Tendy sort of stands up for the crew and says they should be able to do what they want to do. And Tendy is about to leave to go back to the Cerritos because her debt is now paid, but she learns that the Blue Orions are going to war with her house, and Tendi decides to stay to defend them, which I love this. I was really worried as the episode was wrapping out that this would just sort of reset to the status quo, like Tendi's back on the Cerritos, and, this little journey was just an episode diversion, which would have been fine, but I do like Lower Decks having its status quo changes be a little bit longer, or even permanent. Obviously, I don't think Tendi's going to stay on Orion the whole season, but I like that we're exploring this side of Tendi and this side of Lower Decks a little bit more than just in one episode. So very cool to see that. Very pumped about that. I've been talking for a really long time. I love this episode. I think this is a very strong episode, especially for the Tendi stuff. A few things here and there I didn't love, like the Rutherford stuff, but overall, strong premiere. Excited to watch the rest of this final season, and remember to be Cerritos strong and be very vocal about the season, so hopefully we can get some more Lower Decks in some form or another. But regardless, I am going to very much savor the bittersweet ending of this show, regardless of if it gets to continue or not. So until then, I will be on this journey with you, my friends, and I hope y'all live long and prosper.